In the beginning, darkness reigned over the abyss, yet God's Spirit hovered above the waters, ready to work wonders. With a single command, God transformed the void into something extraordinary. Suddenly God said, "Let there be light," and as if by magic, light was born. God saw that the light was good and separated it from the darkness. He called the light day and the darkness night. Evening came and morning followed. This was the first day. Thus, the first day came to an end. The next day, God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate them." And so it happened. God divided the waters in two, those below and those above, which God called sky. Evening came and morning followed. This was the second day. On the third day, God said, "Let the waters under the sky gather into one place, and let dry ground appear." And so it happened. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters seas. And once again, God marveled at his work. But the Lord didn't stop there. He continued, saying, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees that bear fruit with seed, each according to its kind." And so it happened. From the bare earth, vegetation began to sprout, seed-bearing plants and trees bearing fruit with seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Evening came, and morning followed. This was the third day. The next day, God proclaimed, "Let there be lights in the sky to separate day from night. Let them serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years." And so the lights appeared in extraordinary fashion, dancing across the firmament, marking the rhythm of seasons and the passage of days and years. Two majestic celestial bodies emerged, the greater, an imposing king ruling the day with its blinding light, the sun, and the lesser, a mysterious queen watching over the night with her soft radiance, the moon. The stars, like tiny jewels, scattered across the sky, illuminating the earth with their twinkling brilliance. And God, pleased with his creation, smiled at the harmony of light and darkness. But creation was not yet complete. On the fifth day, God declared, "Let the waters teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." In an instant, the waters came alive, teeming with marine creatures of all shapes and sizes. Enormous sea animals plowed through the depths, while schools of colorful fish swam in perfect synchrony. In the sky, birds spread their wings, painting the heavens with their exotic plumage and filling the air with their melodious songs. God, pleased with his work, blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters of the seas. Let the birds multiply across the earth." Evening came, then morning, the fifth day. The once silent earth trembled as the Lord spoke again. "Let the land produce living creatures, livestock, wild animals, and creatures that move along the ground, each according to its kind." In the blink of an eye, the earth transformed into a paradise teeming with life. Herds of animals grazed in lush meadows, while wild beasts roared in the jungles. Reptiles of every kind crawled across the ground, leaving their marks on the newly created earth. And God, beholding the diversity and beauty of his creation, saw that it was good. But the final piece, the masterpiece of creation, was yet to come. God, with a solemn and purposeful tone, declared, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." And so God created mankind in his own image, and bestowed upon them an extraordinary gift, dominion over all creation, destined to govern and care for all the wonders God had made. But God, in his infinite wisdom, knew his creatures would need sustenance. So, with a generous gesture, he declared, "Behold, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They shall be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. When God looked upon all that he had made, his heart swelled with satisfaction. It was a masterpiece, a testament to his infinite power and love. And so, as night fell and dawn broke on the sixth day, God beheld his creation and saw that it was very good. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on that day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Now, no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. His lungs filled with air, and his heart began to beat strongly. His eyes opened for the first time, marveling at the world around him. In an act of love, God decided to create a special place for mankind. He planted a garden in the east of Eden, making every kind of tree grow that was pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden, he placed the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eden was not only a feast for the eyes, but also a source of life and sustenance. From its depths flowed a crystal-clear river that watered the garden, splitting into 4 streams that stretched to the ends of the earth. The first was called Pishon, which wound through the entire land of Havilah, where gold was found. The gold of that land was pure. Aromatic resin and onyx were also there. The second river was called Gihon, which flowed around the whole land of Cush. The third river was the Tigris, which ran east of Asher. And the fourth was the Euphrates. In the midst of this idyllic scene, God the Lord placed the man he had formed to cultivate and care for this wonderful garden. However, God gave the man one command: "You may eat from every tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For on the day you eat from it, you will surely die." This was the only order God gave to man. Then God the Lord showed the man all the animals of his creation so that he could name them. And so the man gave names to all living creatures, to all domestic animals, to all the birds of the sky, and to all the wild animals. Yet despite the beauty and diversity of creation, the man felt incomplete. God, in his infinite wisdom, understood the man's need and said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a suitable helper for him." Then God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. With the rib in his hands, the Lord God shaped a woman, a perfect companion for man. Every curve, every feature was molded with love and purpose. Suddenly, the man awoke and gazed in wonder at the woman God had created. His voice quivering with emotion, he exclaimed, "At last! This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." The man named his wife Eve, for she would become the mother of all living. From that moment on, it was established that a man would leave his father and mother to be united with his wife, and the two would become one flesh. Thus, in the midst of a lush garden teeming with life, the story of humanity began. In that time of innocence and purity, the man and woman were naked, yet they felt no shame. Their nakedness reflected the transparency of their souls and their complete trust in their Creator and themselves. Adam and Eve lived in a state of absolute bliss in the incredible Garden of Eden. Their days were filled with laughter and walks along flowery paths, exploring Eden's corners, marveling at each new creature and delicious fruit they discovered. Their hearts overflowed with gratitude to God for the abundance He had bestowed upon them. But in the garden's shadows, a cunning figure watched. The serpent, with a wicked smile, slithered up to Eve. "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" it whispered, sowing doubt. Eve hesitated but replied innocently, "We may eat fruit from all the trees except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." "You will not certainly die." The serpent's voice grew more intense, laden with seduction. "Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The desire to know the forbidden burned in Eve's heart. Unable to resist temptation, she reached out her hand, took the fruit, and ate. The taste was divine, so she rushed to share it with her husband, who also partook of the forbidden fruit. Suddenly, their eyes were opened, and they became aware of a hidden reality. They were naked. Their nakedness, once unnoticed, now filled them with shame. With trembling hands, they wove fig leaves to cover their vulnerability, seeking refuge in the garden's dense foliage. As the day cooled, the man and woman heard God the Lord walking through the garden. Feeling even more ashamed, they ran to hide among the trees to avoid being seen naked. But God the Lord called out to the man, saying, "Where are you?" The man replied, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked. "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" He replied, "The woman you gave me as a companion offered me that fruit, and I ate it." Then the Lord God asked the woman, "What have you done?" She answered, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." God then turned to the serpent, his voice stern and solemn. "Because of what you've done, you'll be cursed among all animals, wild and domestic. You'll crawl on your belly, eating dust for the rest of your days." He continued, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. Her seed will crush your head, while you'll strike at their heel." Next, God faced the woman, his words echoing through generations. "I'll intensify your pain in childbirth. You'll bear children in agony. You'll desire your husband, but he will rule over you." Finally, God looked at the man and declared, "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the forbidden tree, the ground is cursed because of you. You'll eat from it in sorrow all your life. It'll produce thorns and thistles, and you'll eat wild plants. By the sweat of your brow, you'll earn your bread until you return to the earth from which you came. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Then the Lord God made clothing from animal skins for the man and his wife. He dressed them and said, "The human has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." With a heavy heart but firm resolve to protect his creations, God finally banished the man and woman from the Garden of Eden. That place of perfect communion and beauty could no longer be their home, for sin had entered the world. As they walked away, the garden vanished from sight, and the first sunset outside Eden painted the sky red. The creation of the universe, filled with wonders and tragedies, marked the beginning of an eternal story of struggle, redemption, and hope. In the arid plains east of Eden, Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain, the firstborn, toiled under the scorching sun, pulling weeds from the earth. Abel, his younger brother, led his flock through the pastures, his face lit with a peace Cain had never known. One day, Cain shouted, "Abel, God seems pleased with you, but not with my offerings. What do you have that I don't?" Abel, stroking one of his lambs, calmly replied, "It's the heart, brother. God looks at the heart." Abel's words echoed in Cain's mind. Days passed, and envy grew like a shadow within him. One night under a star-studded sky, Cain made a decision. "Come to the field with me tomorrow," he told Abel, his eyes hiding his true intentions. At dawn, the brothers met in the fields. The tension was palpable, the air heavy. "Why does God favor you and not me?" Cain asked, his voice a dangerous whisper. "It's our faith, Cain. God wants us to give our best with sincerity," Abel replied, not sensing the threat. Suddenly, the calm of the field was shattered by a dull thud. Cain, with a stone in hand, struck Abel on the head. Abel fell to the ground, his eyes filled with surprise and pain. "Cain, my brother," he murmured, before his voice was silenced forever. The once vibrant earth, a stage for life, became the first witness to history's oldest crime. Abel's blood soaked the ground, crying out to heaven for justice. Cain, his hands trembling and stained red, stared in horror at what he'd done. Suddenly, a voice thundered in his mind, powerful and all-knowing. "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain replied, his voice cracking with fear and guilt. God sternly declared, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. You are cursed, banished from this land that has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood." The tragedy of Cain and Abel was etched into humanity's heart, an eternal reminder of envy and hatred's destructive power. Time passed, but the earth had become corrupt. Mankind's wickedness had grown immense. God, looking down with sorrow, decided to end the depravity. Yet amidst this darkness, hope rested on one man, Noah. At 600 years old, Noah felt the weight of his age. As he gazed at the dark sky, he sensed his end was near. The world around him had become utterly corrupt, drowning in evil and violence. God's voice resonated, deep and clear. "Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Build an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch." The enormity of these words left him breathless. God had chosen him, of all people, for a task beyond his comprehension. Noah obeyed immediately, but it wasn't easy. His family doubted him and whispered behind his back. "Is he crazy? An ark in the middle of dry land?" his children murmured. Neighbors mocked him, their laughter filled with contempt. "Building a boat on dry land, Noah? You're insane." "Judgment is coming," Noah would reply, his voice firm and his eyes full of conviction. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each day was a marathon of physical and mental effort. The tension was palpable. Time seemed to run faster than they could work. Amid the construction, moments of high tension arose. One afternoon, while securing a crucial beam, the wind suddenly picked up, threatening to unravel everything. "Quick! Hold it steady!" Noah shouted, and his sons rushed to help. Sweat poured down their brows as they battled against the elements, the wood creaking under the pressure. During a moment of calm, Noah and his wife paused to survey their work. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked, doubt evident in her voice. "It's God's will," Noah replied, "and in His will we find our hope." In the final days of construction, tension reached its peak. Clouds began to form on the horizon, a constant reminder of the impending storm. Then God commanded, "Enter the ark, you and all your household. For I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every clean animal, male and female, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate. Also 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." At dawn, from the farthest corners of the earth, the animals began to arrive. Elephants, lions, deer, and birds of every hue and size converged on a single point, as if guided by an invisible force. The air crackled with tension and urgency. The timing was impeccable, but the challenge lay in maintaining calm amidst the chaos. As the last pair of animals boarded the ark, the sky suddenly darkened. The first raindrops fell, followed by an unrelenting downpour. "Everyone inside," Noah commanded his family. He entered the ark, glancing back one final time at the world they were leaving behind. Suddenly, the doors of the ark began to close. A strong wind gusted, and the rain started to fall with fury. Droplets turned to torrents in mere seconds. The people, at first curious, soon became panic-stricken. "Noah was right," they cried, rushing towards the ark, desperately pounding on the doors. "Let us in!" But it was too late. The waters rose rapidly, swallowing cities and mountains whole. The screams outside faded away, replaced by the unsettling sound of water and creaking wood. Inside the ark, Noah and his family listened to the roar of divine judgment, their hearts filled with fear, but also hope. "God, why us?" asked one of Noah's sons, his voice trembling. "Because we found favor in his eyes," Noah replied, his words heavy with gratitude and awe. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain did not cease. The ark rose above the waters, floating on an endless sea of destruction. Finally, the flood subsided, and the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. Noah, shaking, opened the window and sent out a dove. On the 3rd attempt, the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak. "The earth is dry," Noah announced, his voice filled with hope. The sun rose on the horizon, bathing the renewed earth in its warm light. Noah and his family gazed upon the new world that awaited them. Then God spoke once more. "Leave the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number. I am making a covenant with you," God said, his voice echoing in the clean air. "Never again will I destroy all life with a flood. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth." A brilliant, colorful rainbow appeared in the sky, a symbol of God's promise. Noah and his family, standing on the renewed earth, looked to the future with hope, knowing they had witnessed and survived the greatest judgment the world had ever known. The sun shone upon the new earth, and life flourished under God's blessing. Noah, having fulfilled his mission, decided to plant a vineyard. In time, the vines grew and bore fruit, and Noah, hoping to celebrate new life, made wine. One evening, after a hard day's work, Noah drank from the fruit of his vineyard. The wine, strong and intoxicating, soon took effect. Noah, unaware, fell asleep in his tent, naked and exposed. Ham, one of his sons, entered the tent and saw his father in this state. Instead of covering him and respecting his dignity, Ham went out and mocked him to his brothers. "Come, look at old Noah. He's drunk and naked," Ham said, his voice filled with contempt. Shem and Japheth, upon hearing Ham's words, looked at their brother with disapproval. "This isn't right," Shem said sternly. Without another word, they took a blanket, walked backward to avoid seeing their father's nakedness, and respectfully covered him. The next morning, Noah awoke. The wine's hangover was nothing compared to the humiliation he felt upon learning what had transpired. "Ham, what have you done?" he asked, his voice filled with pain and disappointment. Ham, seeing the fury in his father's eyes, remained silent. Noah, overcome with anger and sorrow, pronounced a curse. "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." Then Noah turned to Shem and Japheth, who had covered him with respect. "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Noah, the righteous man who had survived the flood, was also human and susceptible to weaknesses. Time passed, and the new earth began to fill with life and activity. Noah, the man who had weathered the flood, watched his children and grandchildren grow in a renewed world. His 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the patriarchs of many nations, their descendants spreading across the earth. Shem, blessed by his father, became the ancestor of the Semites, including the Hebrews. Ham, despite the curse on his son Canaan, also saw his descendants multiply. His children became the fathers of many African and Asian nations, expanding to the southwest. Japheth, the youngest, watched his descendants spread north and west. His sons founded the European and Asian nations. Noah's days stretched on in peace and contemplation. He lived another 350 years after the flood, reaching the incredible age of 950. When Noah finally breathed his last, his family surrounded him. "A righteous man has died," Shem said, his words heavy with emotion, "but his spirit and teachings will live forever." Through Noah's sons, God repopulated the earth, giving rise to diverse peoples. Humanity, united by a single language, gathered in the vast plains of Shinar. "Let's build a city and a tower that reaches the heavens," proclaimed Nimrod, their leader. "We will make a name for ourselves, so we won't be scattered across the face of the earth." The project progressed rapidly. Bricks piled up and the tower rose imposingly toward the sky. "Higher!" Nimrod commanded. "It must touch the firmament." But in heaven, God was watching. "Look," he said to the angels, "the people are one, and they all speak the same language. Nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them." Suddenly, the noise of work ceased. A laborer asking for more bricks was met with an incomprehensible response. "What did you say?" he asked, his face filled with confusion. The answer was a torrent of unintelligible words. "What's happening?" Nimrod shouted, trying to restore order, but words no longer made sense. Confusion spread like wildfire, swift and devastating. "I can't understand you. Speak clearly." In the blink of an eye, communication turned to chaos. Lifelong friends looked at each other with eyes full of despair. "Nimrod, do something!" they cried, but even his orders couldn't overcome the babel of tongues. "God has punished us," an old man shouted, his voice trembling with reverent fear. "We must disperse." Suddenly, construction halted. The grand tower stood abandoned, a testament to human ambition and divine judgment. The groups of people, now divided by language, began to separate. Entire families set off in different directions, seeking new lands where they could understand one another. Nimrod, standing at the base of the tower, looked around. The city he had dreamed of was crumbling. "This can't be," he muttered, but knew he had been defeated by a far greater power. From above, God watched the dispersal. "So it shall be," he said, his voice resonating with authority and sorrow. Humanity will multiply and fill the earth, but they won't forget the price of their arrogance. The tower became ruins, a reminder of the day God confused languages and scattered mankind across the earth. Later, God chose a family to form the people who would be the instrument to bring the promised Messiah into the world. One night, as the stars shone brightly, a heavenly voice broke into Abraham's life and said, "Leave your homeland and your father's house and go to the land I will show you." The voice wasn't audible to the ears, but it was clearer and more powerful than any thunderstorm. "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Through you, all peoples on earth will be blessed." Abraham was left breathless. How could an ordinary man be chosen for such an immense destiny? Abraham was born in Ur of the Chaldeans, a bustling Mesopotamian city where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave life to the land. His father, Terah, was respected, but their days were simple, filled with rituals in a polytheistic society. The divine call transformed him, a brutal awakening and a radical break. "Why me?" Abraham whispered under the starry sky. The night heaven seemed as infinite as the promise he had received. At 75 years old, his incredible story began. He decided to face his fears and depart. "We're leaving," he announced to Sarai, his wife. "Where to?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "To the land the Lord will show us," he replied with determination. With a heart full of hope and a budding faith, he obeyed the Lord. He set out with Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions. They headed towards Canaan. The journey was fraught with uncertainty, but divine promise guided them. They crossed Haran and finally reached Canaan, a land of rolling hills and fertile valleys. There dwelt the Canaanites in fortified cities, each ruled by its own king. Abraham traveled through the country until he reached sacred Shechem, beneath the majestic oak of Moreh. Suddenly, the Lord appeared again and declared, "To your offspring I will give this land." Moved, Abraham built an altar there and prayed to the Lord, but soon the promised land turned hostile. A severe famine struck Canaan, and the fertile soil turned to dust. Livestock died and provisions grew scarce. One night, Abraham lifted his eyes to the sky. "Why have you brought us here?" he cried, seeking answers among the stars. Silence was his only answer. With a heavy heart, he made a decision. "We'll go to Egypt," he announced. Sarai looked at him with concern. "What about the Lord's promise?" "We must survive," Abraham replied, hiding his doubts behind a resolute gaze. The journey to Egypt would be dangerous, but staying meant certain death. On a starlit night, a powerful voice echoed in Abraham's mind. "Fear not, Abraham, I am your shield. Your reward shall be great." Though these words filled his heart with hope, fear still dwelled within him. He knew that Sarai, his beloved wife, was his greatest treasure, and feared for her life in unknown lands. He had to protect her at all costs when they reached Egypt, so he devised a plan. As they approached Egypt, Abraham stopped and spoke to Sarai. "I know you're a beautiful woman," he said worriedly. "When the Egyptians see you, they'll say, 'She's his wife,' and kill me to have you. Please, say you're my sister." Sarai nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They arrived in Egypt, a city marked by the stark contrast between opulent palaces and widespread slavery. But Abraham was right. Upon entering the city, all eyes were fixed on Sarai's beauty. The Egyptians took her to Pharaoh's palace, and Abraham received sheep, cattle, donkeys, servants, and camels as a reward. But the joy was short-lived. Mysterious plagues befell Pharaoh and his household, bringing chaos and despair. Furious and bewildered, Pharaoh confronted Abraham. "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Your deception has brought curses upon me. Take your woman and leave my land." Ashamed but relieved, Abraham departed Egypt with Sarai and all their possessions. As they journeyed toward Canaan, he reflected on what had transpired. The Lord is truly a shield and guide in times of uncertainty, he thought. Back in Canaan, Abraham, Sarai, and their nephew Lot faced a new challenge. Their flocks and wealth had grown so much that the land could no longer support them all. Shepherds began to quarrel, tension mounted, and the families were on the brink of conflict. Amidst the chaos, Abraham calmly called Lot. "There must be no strife between us or our shepherds. We are family. Look at the land before us. If you go left, I'll go right. If you choose right, I'll go left." Lot surveyed the Jordan Valley, lush and fertile like Eden itself. "I'll choose the Jordan Valley," he declared, eager to prosper in those abundant lands. So they parted ways. Lot settled near Sodom, a city notorious for its wickedness, while Abraham remained in Canaan. That night, the Lord spoke to Abraham once more. "Lift your eyes and look from where you stand, to the north and south, east and west. All the land you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever." Moved, Abraham built an altar to honor the Lord. Though facing challenges and tough choices, his faith grew stronger with each test. He knew he wasn't alone. Meanwhile, on the plains near Sodom, Lot began to experience the consequences of his decision. Shadows of corruption and danger loomed over him and his family. But Abraham was unaware of this, until one day, under the shade of the oaks of Mamre, he looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. Without hesitation, he ran to meet them and bowed low to the ground. "My lord," he said urgently, "if I have found favor in your eyes, let me bring you some water to wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarai, "Quick, get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." Abraham rushed to the herd, chose the finest calf, and gave it to a servant to prepare at once. He served the feast with curds, milk, and meat, then stood by them under the tree as they ate. One of the men asked, "Where is Sarai, your wife?" "There, in the tent," Abraham replied. Then one of them spoke with authority. "I will return to visit you in a year, and by then Sarai will have had a son." From the tent entrance, Sarai was listening. Hearing this, she laughed silently and thought, "Am I to have this pleasure now that I'm withered and my husband is old?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why does Sarai laugh? Does she think she can't have a child in her old age? Is anything impossible for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, and Sarai will have a son." After eating, the men rose and looked toward Sodom. Abraham walked with them to see them off. Then the Lord shared his plans with Abraham. "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down to see if their actions are as wicked as the reports reaching me." Abraham asked anxiously, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people there?" The Lord replied, "If I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the whole city for their sake. Though I am but dust and ashes, I have been bold to speak. What if only 10 can be found?" Abraham persisted. The Lord concluded, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." After the conversation, Abraham returned to his tent with a heart full of fear. He knew his nephew Lot was in Sodom. Meanwhile, in Sodom, two angels were entering the city. Lot was sitting at the gateway, and when he saw them, he immediately got up and approached them. "Please, my lords, come to your servant's house for the night," he pleaded. "You can wash your feet, and in the morning continue on your way." They replied, "No, we'll spend the night in the square." But Lot insisted so much that they agreed and went to his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread. Together they shared the meal. Suddenly, a mob surrounded the house with clubs in their hands and shouted, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out!" Lot went out to speak with them, closing the door behind him. "Please, my brothers, don't do this evil thing," he begged desperately. The enraged crowd responded, "Get out of our way! This foreigner came to live among us, and now he wants to be our judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They began to press against Lot, trying to break down the door. Suddenly, the angels struck the men outside with blindness. They could no longer find the entrance. The angels said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here? Get your family out of this place, because we are going to destroy it. The outcry against its inhabitants has reached the Lord, and He has sent us to destroy it." Lot rushed out to gather his family. "Hurry, we must leave this place," he warned. "The Lord is about to destroy the city." But they didn't believe him. The angels urged Lot, "Quick, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you'll be swept away when the city is punished." Lot hesitated, but the men grabbed his hand, along with his wife and daughters, and led them out of the city, for the Lord had mercy on him. Once outside, one of them said, "Run for your lives. Don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you'll be destroyed." They ran as fast as they could towards Zoar, as the sky began to brighten with dawn. And with the first ray of sunlight, the Lord rained down sulfur and fire from the heavens upon Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed those cities, the entire plain, all the inhabitants, and the vegetation on the ground. But Lot's wife couldn't resist and look back. In that instant, she turned into a pillar of salt. Miles away, at daybreak, Abraham went to the place where he had stood before the Lord and looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah. Suddenly, he watched in horror as thick smoke rose like the fumes from a furnace. A chill ran down his spine. The cities had been judged. Though divine judgment had fallen on these cities, the Lord remembered his promise to Abraham and saved Lot. The devastation served as a grim reminder of sin's consequences and the importance of obeying God. Abraham moved to the Negev region and settled as a foreigner in Gerar. Once again, Abraham introduced his wife by saying, "She is my sister." Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarai and took her for himself. That night, God appeared to Abimelech in a dream and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She's a married woman." Startled, Abimelech replied, "Lord, would you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't he tell me she is my sister? And didn't she also say he is my brother? I have acted with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die." At dawn, Abimelech summoned all his servants and told them what had happened. Fear gripped them all. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said anxiously, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you've brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You've done things to me that should never be done." Abraham replied, I thought there was no fear of God in this place and that you would kill me because of my wife. Besides, she truly is my sister, my father's daughter, but not my mother's. And she became my wife. When God had me leave my father's house, I told her, "This is how you can show your love to me. Wherever we go, say of me, 'He is my brother.'" Then Abimelech took sheep, cattle, and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham. He also returned Sarai, his wife, to him. Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Settle wherever you please." But after this incident, the Lord visited Abraham and Sarai in a miraculous way, fulfilling his promise beyond what they could imagine. Sarai conceived and bore a son in her old age, just as God had announced. Abraham named him Isaac, obeying the divine instruction. Sarai, filled with joy, exclaimed, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." When he was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised Isaac, faithfully following God's commands. He was 100 years old when his son was born, a living testimony to the Lord's power and faithfulness. On the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham threw a grand feast. Amidst the celebration, Sarai spotted Ishmael, the son of Hagar the Egyptian, mocking Isaac. "So you're the chosen one," Ishmael muttered. Isaac looked at him, bewildered. With a hardened expression, Sarai approached Abraham and said, "Send away that slave woman and her son. The son of this slave will not share the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham, taken aback by Sarai's vehemence, furrowed his brow. "What are you saying?" he replied. "Ishmael is my son too." "I won't allow that woman and her boy to endanger Isaac," Sarai declared. Silence fell between them. Night came, but rest eluded Abraham. Restless, he left his tent and gazed at the starry sky. A soft yet firm voice echoed within him. "Do not be distressed about the boy and your servant. Listen to whatever Sarai tells you. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will also make a nation of the son of the servant, because he is your offspring." At dawn, with a heavy heart, Abraham took bread and a skin of water. He approached Hagar's tent. "You must leave," he said bluntly. Hagar looked at him in disbelief. "Leave? Where to?" "To the desert," Abraham replied, avoiding her gaze. "God will be with you." "After all this time," she protested, her voice tinged with anguish, "is this how you send us away?" "It's necessary," he affirmed, handing her the provisions. "I can do no more." With tears in her eyes, Hagar took Ishmael by the hand and left the camp. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast nothingness. The heat was stifling, the water skin emptied quickly. Ishmael, weak and dehydrated, collapsed. "Mother, I can't go on," he whispered. Hagar, desperate, laid him under a bush. "Wait here," she said, her voice breaking. She walked a few steps away, and unable to bear watching her son die, burst into tears. "My God, why?" Hagar cried out. Then a voice from heaven spoke to her. "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the boy's voice. Rise, lift the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Surprised, Hagar opened her eyes and saw a well of water that wasn't there before. She ran, filled the water skin, and gave Ishmael a drink. Life returned to the boy's eyes. At that time, God decided to test Abraham. "Abraham," the Lord called. "Here I am," Abraham responded, always ready to hear his voice. Then God gave him an instruction that would shake any father's heart to the core. "Take your only son, Isaac, whom you love so dearly. Go to the region of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you." Abraham's soul was filled with a storm of emotions. "How can this be?" he thought. "He's the son of promise." But his unwavering faith sustained him. At dawn the next day, He rose early and commanded with resolve, "Prepare the donkey. We'll depart at sunrise." He took his beloved son Isaac by the hand, and together they set out for the place God had designated. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and then we will come back to you." He placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders. He carried the fire and the knife in his own hands. As they walked in silence, Isaac spoke up. "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," said Isaac, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham, struggling to contain his emotions, replied, "God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice, my son." They arrived at the place God had shown them. Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood. Each movement was an internal struggle. He turned to Isaac, his eyes red with anguish. With trembling hands, Abraham bound his son. Isaac, bewildered, cried out, "Father, what are you doing?" Tears flowed. "God has asked for this," he whispered. "Trust in him." He raised his hand, gripping the knife to sacrifice his son. At that moment, a voice from heaven called out, "Abraham, Abraham!" His hand froze midair. "Here I am," he responded desperately. "Do not lay a hand on the boy or harm him. Now I know that you fear God, for you have not withheld your son from me." Abraham dropped the knife. An indescribable relief washed over him. He untied Isaac and embraced him tightly. "Father!" Isaac exclaimed, his eyes filled with tears and wonder. "God is merciful," Abraham replied, caressing his son's face. Suddenly, Abraham looked up and saw behind him a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. Without hesitation, he took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Then the angel of the Lord called to him a second time from heaven and said, "I swear by my own name that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your offspring will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Abraham, with tears still in his eyes, embraced his son and said, "Let's go home." Sometime later, news broke Abraham's heart. Sarai, his beloved wife of 127 years, had died. He felt a deep sorrow, an immense void. But he needed to give Sarai a worthy resting place. He went to the city of Hebron to meet with the Hittites. "I am a foreigner and stranger among you," he said to the sons of Heth. "Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead." The sons of Heth replied, "Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead." But Abraham persisted. "Allow me to buy the cave of Machpelah that belongs to Ephron." Ephron, present among them, replied, "My lord, I give it to you. The cave and the surrounding field are yours." "No," Abraham said firmly, "I will pay the fair price." Ephron answered, "My lord, hear me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Without hesitation, Abraham weighed out the silver and handed it over. Thus, he acquired his first property in the Promised Land. So, Ephron's field in Machpelah, facing Mamre, with the cave and all the trees in the field, became Abraham's property as a family burial site. After this, Abraham buried Sarai in the cave of the field at Machpelah in the land of Canaan. Abraham secured a resting place for his family for generations. It was a testament to his commitment to the land God had promised him. After Sarai's death, Abraham found comfort and companionship in Keturah, a woman he married and had 6 more children with, thus expanding the family God had promised him. Yet an inner voice troubled him. What of Isaac? He needs a companion. His son's loneliness worried him, for upon Isaac rested God's promise. Abraham summoned Eliezer, a loyal servant, and asked him to find a wife for Isaac. Placing his hand under his master's thigh, Eliezer swore to fulfill his mission. Upon reaching the city of Nahor, Eliezer halted by the well outside the city. It was the hour when women came out to draw water. Suddenly, a radiantly beautiful young woman appeared. It was Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel. Eliezer was awestruck. Could it be her? He wondered. He approached her and asked, "Whose daughter are you?" "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah and Nahor," Rebekah replied. Amazement swept over Eliezer. She was indeed from Abraham's family. "Blessed be the Lord," he exclaimed. "Is there room in your father's house for us to stay?" "Of course," she affirmed. "There's space and food for your camels too." In Bethuel's house, after sharing the story, Eliezer made his request. "My master Abraham sent me to find a wife for his son Isaac. Rebekah is the chosen one." Laban, Rebekah's brother, and Bethuel replied, "This is from the Lord. Take Rebekah and go." The next day, Eliezer prepared to leave. On the return journey, Isaac was meditating in the field at dusk. Looking up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah saw him too. "Who is that man coming through the field towards us?" she asked Eliezer. "It's my master," he answered. She took a veil and covered herself. When they met, Isaac looked at Rebekah and without words felt in his heart that it was her. "Rebekah," he said softly, "you are welcome." She raised her eyes, and their gazes met. In that instant, a deep love was born. Abraham, seeing his son happy, felt his mission was fulfilled. He had faced losses and trials, but God's promise continued through Isaac and Rebekah. One evening, as the sun set behind the dunes, Abraham gathered his children around the fire. "Father, tell us about God's promise," they asked with shining eyes. Abraham smiled and said, "God promised me that my descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky." Jokshan, curious, asked, "Are we part of that promise too?" "Yes, my children," Abraham replied, looking at each of them. "You all are part of God's plan for our family." As time passed, Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, continuing the lineage the Lord had promised. Children's laughter filled the camp, a sign of multiplying blessings. Knowing his days were numbered, Abraham called Isaac to his side. "My son," he said calmly, "I leave all my possessions to you. You are the son of the promise I made with Sarai. It is your duty to continue the legacy God has given us." Isaac nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I will honor your legacy, Father," he promised. Meanwhile, in distant lands, Ishmael, Abraham's first son with Hagar, heard news of his father's imminent death. Without hesitation, he set out on the journey back. Upon arriving at the camp, Isaac was surprised to see him. "Ishmael, what are you doing here?" "I've come to say goodbye to our father," Ishmael replied solemnly. On his deathbed, Abraham sensed the presence of his sons. He opened his eyes and managed a weak smile, seeing Isaac and Ishmael together. With profound peace, Abraham breathed his last. At 175 years old, Abraham went to be with the Lord. Despite their differences, Isaac and Ishmael united to bid farewell to their father. Together, they carried Abraham's body to the cave of Machpelah, the family tomb he had purchased. As they laid the body in its resting place, Ishmael looked at Isaac and said, "Despite everything, we are brothers." Isaac responded with a faint smile. "Indeed, today we honor our father together." The desert wind blew gently. Both brothers understood that Abraham's legacy was more than land and wealth. It was an inheritance of faith and obedience. They left the cave, knowing their father's example would inspire future generations to trust God and follow his ways, just as Abraham had done. Years passed, and nations arose from the sons of Abraham. God blessed Isaac with his wife Rebekah's pregnancy. But the blessing was twofold: twins. Inside their mother's womb, Jacob and Esau fought relentlessly. Rebekah, puzzled by the constant movement in her belly, turned to God. The answer was clear: 2 nations are in your womb, and the older will serve the younger. At birth, Esau emerged first, fair and covered in hair. But Jacob wouldn't let him go so easily. His hand grasped his brother's heel as he followed. Thus began Jacob's life, fighting to be the chosen one from his very first breath. Esau grew strong and wild, a man of the field, his father Isaac's favorite. Jacob, on the other hand, sought wisdom, listening to the elders, always under his mother Rebekah's watchful care. 2 brothers, 2 paths, and only one promised blessing. One day Esau returned from hunting, exhausted and famished. Jacob saw his chance. He proposed a deal: Esau's birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. Esau impulsively agreed, disregarding his birthright for momentary satisfaction. And so, for a mere bowl of food, the fate of 2 nations changed forever. Jacob knew that although the birthright was his by oath, he still needed his father's blessing. Time passed, and that day arrived. Isaac, blind with age and weak-voiced, called for Esau to give him the blessing. But Esau wasn't home. He had gone hunting. So Rebekah set a plan in motion. "Quick, Jacob, bring 2 young goats from the flock. I'll prepare the stew your father loves, and you'll receive the blessing instead of your brother." Jacob hesitated for a moment. "But mother, my skin is smooth while Esau's is hairy. Father will touch me and discover the deception. He'll curse me instead of blessing me." Rebekah, with determination in her eyes, replied, "Let your curse fall on me. Do as I say." So Jacob covered himself with goatskins to mimic his brother's skin and wore Esau's clothes to carry his scent. With the stew in hand, he approached his father's tent. Jacob's heart raced as Isaac's trembling voice greeted him. "Is that you, my son?" Jacob, in a hushed voice, replied, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you asked. Sit up and eat, so you may bless me." Isaac, puzzled, touched the hairy hands and inhaled Esau's scent from the clothes. He hesitated briefly, but ultimately the blessing flowed from his lips. Jacob, his heart racing, listened to the words that would change his life. "May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you." Now God's promise was his. But the deception was soon revealed. Esau returned, and when he sought his blessing, Isaac's words echoed the grim reality of the fulfilled prophecy. "I have already given the blessing. What else can I do for you, my son?" Suddenly, he understood his brother's deceit, and a heart-wrenching cry erupted from the depths of his being. "Father, bless me too!" But the blessing had been given, and there was no turning back. Esau's anger burned in his heart, and as he left the tent he vowed, "When my father dies, I will kill my brother Jacob." But Rebekah, ever vigilant, overheard Esau's hate-filled words and warned Jacob, "Your brother is planning to kill you. Flee to my brother Laban's house in Haran. Stay there until your brother's fury subsides." Jacob, forced to flee, left everything behind. He walked alone through the desert, the weight of his deception heavy on his shoulders and an uncertain future ahead. Each step took him further from home, family, and all he had ever known. As night fell in the midst of that desolate wilderness, Jacob lay down to sleep, using a stone for a pillow. Suddenly, something extraordinary occurred. In his dreams, a ladder stretched from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. At the top stood the Lord, his voice resonating over Jacob. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring shall be as numerous as the dust of the earth, spreading to the west, east, north, and south. Through you and your descendants, all families of the earth will be blessed. I am with you and will protect you wherever you go." Jacob awoke, filled with awe and reverence. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was unaware." He named that place Bethel, the house of God, and vowed that if God brought him safely back, he would be his God. At dawn, Jacob continued his journey toward Haran, God's promise echoing in his mind and the fear of his brother haunting his every step. After days of solitary travel, he finally reached the land near his uncle Laban's home. There, beside a well, Jacob had an encounter that would change his life forever. As he approached the well, he saw several shepherds waiting to water their flocks. He went up to them and asked about his uncle Laban. The shepherds replied that Laban's daughter Rachel was approaching with her flock. Suddenly, Jacob saw a young woman approaching, and his heart skipped a beat. It was Rachel, Laban's daughter. He fell in love with her at first sight. Then, with a strength he had never shown before, he rolled away the heavy stone from the well and watered Rachel's flock. Jacob told her who he was, and Rachel, surprised and excited, ran to tell her father Laban. When Laban heard his nephew had arrived, he rushed to greet him, embracing him and bringing him home. Jacob began working for his uncle, but in his heart, the desire to be with Rachel grew with each passing day. After a month, Laban made him an offer. "It's not right for you to work for me without pay. Tell me what wages you want." Jacob, without hesitation, replied, "I'll work for you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban agreed, and so Jacob's days were filled with hard work, but his heart was full of hope and love for Rachel. Finally, the day arrived. The wedding was prepared, and Jacob, eager to receive Rachel as his wife, celebrated the union with a grand feast. But that night, under the cover of darkness, Laban committed a deception Jacob could never have anticipated. Instead of Rachel, he brought Leah, his older daughter, to Jacob's bed. And when morning came, Jacob discovered the cruel truth. His own uncle had deceived him, just as he had deceived his brother years ago. Jacob, enraged, confronted Laban. "What have you done to me? Didn't I work for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban, calm and unremorseful, replied, "It's not our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this week of wedding celebrations with Leah, and I'll give you Rachel too, in exchange for another 7 years of work." Jacob's heart was shattered, but his love for Rachel was stronger than his anger. So he accepted the deal, and a week later he married Rachel, knowing full well that his life was now bound to more years of hard labor under the watchful eye of his cunning uncle. As time passed, Jacob found himself trapped in a new struggle. He loved Rachel deeply, but Leah was his wife too. God, seeing Jacob's disdain for Leah, blessed her with children while Rachel remained barren. Leah gave birth to Reuben, then Simeon, Levi, and Judah, while Rachel suffered in silence. Tension in Jacob's household grew day by day. Leah, despite having given him 4 sons, watched sadly as Jacob continued to love Rachel more than her. Meanwhile, Rachel, desperate to bear Jacob's children, sought a solution. In an act of deep frustration, she offered Jacob her servant Bilhah, hoping that through her she could have offspring. Jacob agreed, and Bilhah bore 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Rachel, though not their biological mother, considered them as her own and exclaimed joyfully, "I have had a great struggle with my sister and I have won." But that victory was far from enough to fill the void she felt in her heart. The rivalry between the 2 sisters intensified. Leah, seeing she had stopped bearing children, refused to be left behind. She too offered her servant Zilpah to Jacob, resulting in 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. Tension in the household became unbearable, each woman vying for Jacob's affection, while he, caught in the middle, watched his family grow as peace slipped away. Years passed, and Leah, as if touched by God's hand once more, conceived again and gave birth to Issachar, then Zebulun, and finally, a daughter named Dinah. Yet Rachel's longing cast a shadow over the family. Her pain, frustration, and helplessness in the face of infertility tormented her day and night. However, one day, when all seemed lost for Rachel, God heard her cry. In a moment of divine grace, Rachel conceived and bore a son. That day, Rachel took the child in her arms and, with tears of joy, said, "God has taken away my shame." She named her son Joseph, and with him, a new chapter opened in Jacob's life. Joseph wasn't just another son to Jacob. He was the child of the woman he loved most, and with Joseph's birth, hope rekindled in Jacob's heart. As time passed, Jacob's flock grew, and he amassed great wealth. Yet he could feel the tension rising around him. Whispers from Laban's sons filled the air, accusing him of stealing their father's fortune. "Everything he has, he got at our father's expense," they said enviously. Jacob noticed how Laban's eyes, once familiar, now held resentment and distrust. The winds of change were blowing. It was then that God spoke directly to Jacob. "Return to your father's land, and I will be with you." This divine promise ignited a spark in his heart. It was time to leave. He called Rachel and Leah to the field, away from prying ears in Laban's house. With a serious voice, he shared his plan to flee. Rachel spoke first. "All that God has taken from our father belongs to us. What we do is for our children's future." Leah nodded firmly. They knew they had nothing more to lose. At dawn, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon, Jacob, his wives, children, and vast fortune of livestock silently set out for Canaan. But Jacob harbored a secret. Rachel, without his knowledge, had stolen her father's household gods. This small act would soon unleash a storm of tension upon their escape. Laban, enraged, discovered his family and wealth had vanished. Wasting no time, he gathered his men and pursued them for 7 days. His heart burned with fury, but in the dead of night, God appeared to him in a dream, warning, "Be careful what you say to Jacob. Do not interfere with his affairs." These divine words halted Laban's momentum, but not his desire for confrontation. Finally, Laban caught up with Jacob in the mountains of Gilead. His shout shattered the camp's silence. "What have you done? You've deceived me and carried off my daughters like captives in war. If not for your God's warning, I would have already exacted justice." Jacob responded forcefully, "I've slaved for you 20 years, 14 for your daughters and 6 for your flocks. You changed my wages 10 times. If it weren't for my father's God, I'd be leaving empty-handed. But God has seen my suffering and rebuked you." Laban, grasping for control, demanded, "And what of my gods? Someone has stolen my idols." Jacob, unaware of Rachel's actions, replied defiantly, "Search the camp. If you find anything of yours, let the guilty one die." Laban began searching through the tents, scrutinizing every corner. Tension filled the air as his men methodically inspected Jacob's family's belongings. When it came time to search Rachel, she cleverly sat upon her camel's saddle where she had hidden the idols. As Laban approached, she softly said, "Forgive me, father, I cannot rise. It's my time of the month." Unsuspecting, Laban withdrew. The idols remained undiscovered, and the confrontation proved fruitless. After this clash, Jacob and Laban knew they couldn't continue like this. On the mountains of Gilead, in a solemn act, they made a covenant. They swore not to harm each other, sealing their final separation. Jacob set up a stone as a witness to their pact, and together they ate in peace, though past wounds still smoldered in their hearts. With the covenant made, Jacob felt truly free for the first time in years. The path to Canaan lay open before him under God's guidance and protection. Jacob resumed his journey, his family by his side, but the weight of the past burdened his heart. He knew he would soon face his brother Esau, whom he had deceived and betrayed so many years ago. The memory of Esau's wrath haunted him. Their last encounter ended with Esau vowing to kill him for stealing his blessing. Time had passed, but the uncertainty of Esau's intentions filled the air with fear. Jacob, seeking a way out, sent messengers to Seir in the steppes of Edom, hoping to appease his brother. "Tell Esau that his servant Jacob returns with great wealth and seeks his favor." But when the messengers returned, their words brought terrifying news. Esau was coming towards him with 400 men. Jacob's heart sank with deep dread. Danger loomed over him, and tension enveloped him like a dark cloak. Desperate, Jacob devised a plan. He divided his family and possessions into 2 groups. If Esau attacked, at least one group might escape. He felt vulnerable, knowing it was risky, but he had faith. Then he offered Esau a generous gift. Flocks of sheep, goats, camels, cattle, and donkeys were sent ahead. Jacob hoped these gifts, one after another, would soften his brother's heart before they finally met face to face. In the midst of his desperation, Jacob fell to his knees and prayed to the God of his fathers. Night fell as Jacob gathered his 2 wives and 11 children to cross the ford of Jabbok, a stream with cold, rushing waters. The relentless currents crashed forcefully, while Jacob guided his family to the other side. Once his family was safely across, Jacob returned to ensure their belongings made it over as well. Jacob found himself alone, enveloped in total darkness and silence. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appeared and, without a word, attacked him. The stranger's strength was supernatural, and Jacob found himself locked in a fierce struggle. The man struck with immense power, but Jacob refused to yield. It was a fight for his life, his destiny, and everything God had promised him. Hours passed, and neither would give in. It was as if time had stopped, and all that existed was this titanic battle. The man, seeing he couldn't overpower Jacob, touched his hip, instantly dislocating it. The pain was excruciating, but still, Jacob wouldn't let go. Panting, his brow drenched in sweat, he cried out, "I won't let you go until you bless me." The words echoed in the darkness, filled with desperation and power. Suddenly, the figure of light spoke with authority. "What is your name?" Jacob, exhausted but resolute, replied, "Jacob." "You shall no longer be called Jacob," said the man. "From now on you'll be Israel, for you have wrestled with God and with humans and have prevailed." The first rays of dawn lit up the sky, and the figure vanished. Though limping from pain, Jacob had gained more than just a blessing. He had been transformed. His name, his identity, everything he was, had changed that night. Jacob, now Israel, limped across the river and rejoined his family. Then Jacob knew that the most dreaded moment of his life was about to arrive, the reunion with his brother Esau. Jacob moved ahead, leaving his family protected behind him. He advanced toward the horizon where, at last, he saw Esau's figure approaching with his 400 men. It was time to face his destiny. The air filled with tension and time seemed to slow. But what happened next was a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness. Suddenly, Esau ran toward him and embraced him. Jacob, eyes squinting with fear, felt the strength of his brother's arms around him. Jacob, with tears in his eyes, said in a trembling voice, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God." After their reunion, Esau suggested they travel together. "Come with me, Jacob. I'll protect you. Let's move forward together." But Jacob replied cautiously, "My Lord knows the children are weak, and I have sheep and cattle that are nursing. If they're forced to go too quickly, they'll die. Please, let me advance at my own pace, and we'll meet in Seir." Esau accepted his brother's request, and, after a peaceful farewell, their paths diverged once again. Jacob continued his journey, carrying the promise of a blessed future. Finally, he arrived in Shechem, in the land of Canaan. This place, between the mountains of Ebal and Gerizim, was sacred to his people. There, Jacob bought a plot of land, knowing this was a good place to settle. However, the peace that seemed to have been achieved would not last. In that same land of Shechem, one of the most tragic events that would mark Jacob's and his family's life occurred. Dinah, his daughter born to Leah, had gone out to meet the women of the region. The innocence of her outing did not foreshadow the horror that was about to come. Shechem, the son of Hamor, prince of the region, saw her. Lust filled his eyes, and in an act of brutality and selfishness, he took her by force and stole her innocence. But after his terrible deed, something unexpected happened in Shechem's heart. He fell in love with Dinah. The very man who had dishonored her now wanted her as his wife. With his pride broken, he went to his father Hamor and begged, "Get me this young woman as my wife." When Jacob learned of the tragedy, he went to embrace his daughter while his sons were returning from the field. But in his heart, anger and pain were growing. When Simeon, Levi, and the rest of his sons found out, their faces darkened with uncontrollable fury. The marriage proposal was received as an intolerable offense to their family and honor. Then Jacob's sons devised a cunning plan. They proposed a seemingly honorable solution. "If you want us to unite as one people, let all the men in your city be circumcised as a sign of this covenant." Shechem, blinded by his desire for Dinah, and Hamor, eager to keep the peace, accepted without suspecting the trap. 3 days passed, and the pain weakened all the men of Shechem after their circumcision. It was then that Simeon and Levi took up their swords. Night fell upon the city, and with it, vengeance was unleashed. With uncontrollable fury, the brothers went from house to house, slaying every male, including Shechem and his father Hamor. Blood ran through the streets, and the city, which had trusted in the promise of peace, was plunged into chaos. Violence had transformed dishonor into a massacre. Jacob, upon hearing of the slaughter, shuddered. The spilled blood would bring not peace, but war. He looked at his sons, their hands stained with blood, and with a mixture of despair and anger, said to them, "You have made me a stench to the people of this land. We are few in number, and if they unite against us, they will destroy us." But his sons, still filled with rage, only replied, "Should our sister have been treated like a prostitute?" The danger was real. Jacob decided they could no longer stay in Shechem. They had to leave before vengeance caught up with them. They journeyed to Bethel, where years ago Jacob had seen the stairway to heaven and wrestled with God. At Bethel, God appeared to him again and spoke in a deep voice. "Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, even a community of nations, shall come from you, and kings shall spring from your line." These words, echoing the promise made to Abraham and Isaac, confirmed that despite violence and chaos, the divine covenant would continue through Jacob and his descendants. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of the promise, Jacob erected an altar in Bethel. With steady hands, he anointed the stone with oil, marking the spot where God had spoken to him. But as the journey continued, a dark shadow began to cloud their path. Rachel, the woman Jacob loved above all others, started to feel pain. She was in labor, but something was wrong. Fear reflected in her eyes, and Jacob watched helplessly as his wife struggled to give birth. The caravan halted, and Rachel's cries filled the air. The midwife tried to comfort her. "Fear not, you have a son." But the news wasn't enough to ease Rachel's consuming pain. In her final moments as life slipped away, Rachel named her son Benoni, meaning son of my sorrow. Rachel's last breath was marked by pain, but also by love for the child she was leaving behind. Jacob, devastated by the moment, couldn't accept this fate for his son. Holding the newborn in his arms, he decided to change the name his beloved wife had given. "He will not be Benoni," he said, his voice breaking with grief. "He will be Benjamin, meaning son of fortune." Though the birth was marked by sorrow, Jacob wanted his son to grow under a blessing, not misfortune. The loss of Rachel was a devastating blow to Jacob. She was his love, the woman he worked 14 long years for, the one who gave his life meaning. There, by the road to Bethlehem, he buried her and raised a stone as an eternal witness to his love for her. The road led him back to Mamre, a sacred place for his father and family. Isaac, Jacob's father, lived to the ripe age of 180. When his final day came, Jacob felt a chapter closing. The family patriarch had departed, but his legacy of faith and obedience was deeply rooted in his children. News of Isaac's death brought Esau, his brother, back into Jacob's life. Together, they carried Isaac's body to its final resting place. As the tomb sealed over Isaac, Jacob felt the weight of responsibility fully upon him. God's promise, passed from Abraham to Isaac, now rested on his lineage. He was the father of 12 sons, the patriarchs of Israel's 12 tribes, through whom God's people would flourish. Jacob looked at his sons and saw the future. Each carried not just his blood, but the weight of a divine destiny. God's covenant was not just with him, but with his offspring, as it had been with his grandfather Abraham before him. Among all his children, one stood out. Joseph, the second youngest, was different. He was the son of Jacob's beloved Rachel and possessed a special grace that seemed to surround him. As a token of his love, Jacob gifted Joseph a coat of many colors. This favoritism, however, stirred jealousy among his brothers. Day after day, they watched Jacob look at Joseph with pride, while they, the older ones, barely received a fraction of that attention. But what truly ignited the flame of hatred in their hearts were Joseph's dreams. Joseph dreamed, and in his dreams he saw his destiny, though he didn't fully understand it. One night he shared one of these dreams with his brothers. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves bowed down to mine." His brother's anger flared upon hearing these words. "Do you intend to reign over us?" they demanded. But Joseph had another dream, even bolder, which he also shared. "I saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to me." Jacob, his father, grew uneasy and thought, "What could this dream mean? Will your mother, your brothers, and I really bow down to you?" Though Jacob kept these words in his heart, Joseph's brothers couldn't bear it anymore. The seed of resentment had sprouted, and soon their jealousy would turn into a plot to get rid of him. One day, while tending the flocks far from home, they saw Joseph approaching. He wore his colorful coat, a constant reminder of his special place in their father's heart. "Here comes the dreamer," they sneered. "Let's kill him and throw his body in a pit. We'll say a wild animal devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, intervened. "Let's not shed blood," he said. "Throw him into this desert pit, but don't harm him." Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. When Joseph arrived, they stripped him of his coat and threw him into the pit. There he lay, alone and frightened at the bottom. His brothers sat down to eat, indifferent to his distress. Then a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants appeared, heading to Egypt. Judah suggested, "What do we gain by killing him? Let's sell him to these Ishmaelites. After all, he's our flesh and blood." So Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver and taken as a slave to Egypt. As the brothers returned home with Joseph's colorful coat stained with goat's blood, Jacob wept inconsolably over the apparent death of his beloved son. Joseph was sold as a slave to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Although Joseph was far from his home and family, he was never alone. God's presence was with him, and everything he did prospered. Potiphar quickly noticed there was something special about Joseph. He put him in charge of his entire household, entrusting him with managing all his affairs. Under Joseph's supervision, Potiphar's house thrived, and it seemed that despite the circumstances, Joseph had found a stable place. However, trials were not far behind. Potiphar's wife, seeing that Joseph was young, handsome, and successful, tried to seduce him day after day. But Joseph, firm in his integrity and loyalty to God, repeatedly refused. Once he told her, "My master has entrusted everything to me. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" But she wouldn't give up. One day, when Joseph was alone in the house, she grabbed him by his cloak and tried to force herself on him. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in the woman's grasp, but this act of loyalty would cost him dearly. Filled with rage and humiliation, she falsely accused him of attempting to dishonor her. When Potiphar heard the story, he was furious and ordered Joseph to be imprisoned. Thus, Joseph went from being the manager of a great house to a prisoner in a dark cell. But even there, God's hand was with him. In prison, Joseph gained the favor of the jailer, who put him in charge of the other inmates. God continued to show his faithfulness, and Joseph's gifts did not go unnoticed. Two of the prisoners, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, had strange dreams that deeply troubled them. Seeing their distress, Joseph said, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer recounted his dream first. "I saw a vine with 3 branches. It budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. I squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in his hand." Joseph interpreted the dream. The 3 branches represent 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you'll serve him as before. But please remember to mention me to Pharaoh when you're free." The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, shared his dream. "I dreamed I was carrying 3 baskets of bread on my head, and birds were eating from the top basket." With a heavy heart, Joseph explained, "The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will take your life, and your body will be hanged, and birds will eat your flesh." And so it happened. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, the cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed just as Joseph had predicted. But the cupbearer, in his joy, forgot to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. 2 years passed, and Joseph remained in prison, waiting and trusting in God's purpose. Then Pharaoh had 2 dreams that no one could interpret. In his desperation, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew in prison who could interpret dreams. Joseph was brought before Pharaoh. Despite his humble appearance, his faith in God was unshakable. When Pharaoh asked him to interpret his dreams, Joseph firmly replied, "It is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Pharaoh recounted his dreams to Joseph. "In the first, I dreamed I was standing by the Nile, and 7 beautiful fat cows came up out of the river and grazed among the reeds. Then 7 other cows came up behind them, but these were ugly and gaunt. The ugly cows ate up the fat ones, but even after they had eaten them, they looked just as gaunt as before. In my second dream, I saw 7 plump, beautiful ears of grain growing on a single stalk. Then 7 withered ears, scorched by the east wind, sprouted and devoured the full ears." The Pharaoh was troubled, and no one in his court could offer a satisfying interpretation. Joseph, confident that God held the answer, explained, "Both dreams have the same meaning. God is revealing to Pharaoh what's about to happen. The 7 fat cows and 7 full ears represent 7 years of abundance throughout Egypt. But the 7 thin cows and 7 withered ears symbolize 7 years of famine that will follow the years of plenty. It will be a famine so severe that it will erase the memory of the prosperous years. Therefore, Pharaoh should seek a wise and discerning man to manage the country. During the 7 years of abundance, food should be collected and stored in the cities as a reserve for the years of famine. This way, Egypt will not perish from scarcity." The Pharaoh and his court were impressed not only by Joseph's wisdom, but also by his clarity and confidence. The Pharaoh said, "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then the Pharaoh made a decision that would change Joseph's life forever. "Since God has revealed all this to you, there is no one as wise and discerning as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will obey your orders. Only I, on the throne, will be greater than you." Thus, Joseph, the young Hebrew who had been sold as a slave and unjustly imprisoned, was elevated to the rank of governor of Egypt, second in power only to the Pharaoh. He was given a signet ring, fine linen clothes, and a gold chain, and the Pharaoh had him ride in a royal chariot throughout the country so that everyone would know of his new position. Joseph immediately set to work, organizing the collection of grain during the 7 years of plenty. He stored vast quantities of food in every city, preparing for the difficult years to come. The abundance was so great that they stopped keeping track of the grain, for it was like the sand of the sea. When the years of famine arrived, just as Joseph had predicted, not only Egypt, but also neighboring lands suffered from scarcity. However, thanks to Joseph's planning, Egypt had sufficient reserves. People from all over came to buy grain, and Joseph became the savior of many nations. Then something unexpected happened. Among those coming to purchase food were his own brothers, the very ones who had sold him into slavery. Seeing him, they did not recognize him, for Joseph was now a powerful man dressed as an Egyptian. But Joseph recognized them immediately. Emotions and pain from the past stirred in his heart. But Joseph remained calm and decided to test his brothers to see if they had changed. He told them one of them must remain in prison while the others returned with grain for their families and brought their youngest brother to prove their honesty. For 3 days, he kept them imprisoned, pondering his next move. On the 3rd day he said, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay confined in jail while you take grain back for your starving households. But bring me your youngest brother, so your words may be verified and you won't die." The brothers said to one another in their own language, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us, but we wouldn't listen. That's why this trouble has come upon us." They didn't know Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. He turned away and wept, but then came back and took Simeon, binding him before their eyes. Upon returning to Canaan, they told their father Jacob everything, including the demand to bring Benjamin. Jacob, distressed, said, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." The famine continued, and finally, Jacob agreed to let Benjamin go with his brothers, sending gifts and double the money to return what had been found in their sacks. The brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin. Seeing them, Joseph ordered his steward to bring them to his house, prepare a feast, and put them at ease. Then Joseph released Simeon and reunited him with the others. Upon seeing Benjamin, his heart was deeply moved. He invited them to dine and seated them in order of birth, which left them amazed. He served them, giving Benjamin portions 5 times larger than the others. Wanting to test their loyalty, he instructed his steward to fill their sacks with grain and return their money, but also had his silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack. The next morning the brothers set out, but they hadn't gone far when the steward caught up with them and accused them of stealing the cup. They defended their innocence, but the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Judah spoke in Benjamin's defense, offering to stay as a slave in his place to avoid causing their father more pain. Then Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. In a moment filled with tears and reconciliation, he revealed himself to them, saying, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But don't be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here. God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. He turned your evil into good to save many lives." Joseph sent for his father Jacob and his entire family to come live in Egypt in the region of Goshen, where they would be protected and cared for during the years of famine. When Jacob learned that his son Joseph was alive, he was filled with joy and exclaimed, "Now I can die in peace, for I have seen your face and know that you live." Joseph, now reunited with his family, experienced moments of joy and gratitude. Jacob and his sons were welcomed in Egypt and settled in the fertile region of Goshen, where they thrived under Pharaoh's protection and Joseph's supervision. Jacob lived 17 more years in Egypt, watching his family grow and prosper. Before he died, he called Joseph and asked him to make a solemn promise, not to let his body rest in Egypt, but to return it to Canaan, to the tomb of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac. Joseph swore to fulfill this wish, reaffirming his commitment to God's covenant that bound his family to the promised land. Jacob, sensing his end was near, gathered his sons to bless them. Jacob's words were not only blessings, but also prophecies about the destiny of each tribe that would emerge from his sons. When Joseph's turn came, Jacob blessed his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, granting them a place among the tribes of Israel. Interestingly, Jacob crossed his hands while blessing them, placing his right hand on Ephraim, the younger, instead of Manasseh, the firstborn. Joseph tried to correct him, but Jacob insisted, "I know, my son, I know. Manasseh will also be great, but his younger brother will be even greater, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." After blessing them all, Jacob gave his final words, reaffirming God's promise concerning the land of Canaan. Then he peacefully breathed his last, surrounded by his family. Joseph faithfully fulfilled the promise made to his father. He requested permission from Pharaoh to take Jacob to Canaan, and a grand funeral procession was organized. After the burial, Joseph's brothers began to worry. They feared that with Jacob gone, Joseph might seek revenge for what they had done to him years ago. So they sent a message to Joseph claiming that Jacob had left one last instruction, that Joseph should forgive them for their sin. Hearing this, Joseph wept and said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God turned it into good, to preserve many lives as it is today. So have no fear. I will provide for you and your children." Joseph lived to be 110 years old, seeing his children and grandchildren grow. Before he died, he called his family and made them swear that when God visited them to bring them back to the Promised Land, they would carry his bones with them. Years later, Jacob's descendants would face slavery in Egypt, but God's promise would remain unbroken and true. At the appointed time, God would raise up Moses to lead them to freedom. And during this exodus, Joseph's bones would journey with them, a symbol of covenant fulfilled and God's unwavering faithfulness to his people. Subscribe now to this channel so you don't miss the upcoming releases of amazing Bible movies. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like. May the Lord bless you. Amen.